this U.S. Recently has said, okay, we're going to trace the origin of the virus because the WHO already twice in China. Last time in China they had 17 experts, including U.S. expert. They gone through everywhere, and then they issued a statement. They had about 40 some days in China, and then they said, here, it's unlikely the virus was extremely unlikely the virus was leaking from a lab. So, but now they're going to come back again. But at that time, Democrats called it the conspiracy theory. But now, seems they are following the Trump steps. So, what do you think about that? I mean, that really is not a good sign. We should really have WHO, US, China, and all other countries, EU, Japan, Australia, to work on how we can have a vaccine for the developing countries, and also maybe the passport for the green vaccine travel documents, something like that. Maybe, so both sides, maybe you can give some more further comments.
Well, let me go back to the experience with SARS, because I think it's very instructive that basically we still don't know exactly how SARS started. And even though, there have been lots of efforts to look into how the transmission began from bats in a cave in Yunnan and how it all happened, we still don't know exactly what happened with SARS. So my assessment is that it's going to be even more difficult to find patient number one with respect to COVID-19, because there were people that were asymptomatic that were carrying it around. And so probably patient number one was someone who was ill, but since the symptoms were so similar to flu in so many people, it might be very hard to find that person. So I think, since we're in the middle still of a raging pandemic, the real effort needs to be focused, as you said, Henry, on addressing the problem, which is people are still getting sick and dying, and we need to try to stop that from happening. We need to try to help too in pandemic 3, because there are more coming after this one. But so it would help us very much to know what happened. But I think it's not the most urgent thing to do right now. And, unfortunately, it again has become this kind of political football between the US and China. I don't think either side is showing themselves in a very good light on this topic. And I wish that, as Michelle Obama used to say, when the other side goes low, we go high. I wish people would find a way to move on from this conversation. Maybe we can have some kind of a bilateral agreement or a WHO statement that says, after the pandemic is controlled in all countries, there's going to be an investigation and everybody has agreed to fully cooperate. And we will move that onto that track when we've gotten all of the vaccines out and dealt with the immediate problem before us. I mean, that would be, to me, the proper ordering of priorities. But, I'm not sure that anyone's going to be listening to me on this.
Correct. Maybe we should deal with the crisis first, and then get the things under control. And in the future, if there's a further tracing, then we maybe should be conduct that worldwide, because there's many cases actually occurred also at the same time or even before what happened in Wuhan. So you're absolutely right. Yes, Ronnie, please.
Well, tracing the source is understandable. We always try to trace it. I mean, with AIDS, people are still tracing it, and that was 30 some years ago, and then SARS, and then now, But as you well said, Susan, to making it a political issue is really, really impeding human progress. And unfortunately, it happened at a time. The COVID happened at a time when the United States choose to fall into this trap. And for example, to say that China purposely leaked this out, I said, who is that stupid son of a gun who want to leak it in your own backyard? You want to leak it, you leak it in somebody's house, not in your own house. And this is, I mean, brain dead almost. Maybe I'm missing something, but why do you want to kill your own people? You kill somebody else. So when you overlay a political dimension to it is really, really terrible. The source, who knows where it is? Some people say it's in the United States or in the West somewhere, because in 2019, it was already discovered in Europe and in the United States with cases which were not widely reported. So I think that the political overlay is really impeding the whole situation. And once it becomes politicized, The Chinese say, hey, wait. You are not interested in science. You're interested in the politics. But I want to finally come back to a point that you make, Susan, that I thought was very interesting. You said that your CDC friend from Beijing evacuated, said that this is the biggest sociological experiment of mankind. It reminds me of what Sigmund Freud said one time. He said the United States is the biggest sociological experiment of mankind, and it won't end well. Well, he's a little bit personally, he didn't like the United States personally, but he's wrong. I mean, the United States went on to become very, very well, at least until now. And I fear that what Sigmund Freud said, the experiment that has gone so well for 200 years is going to turn bad. And the reason is because I think America is picking on a fight that it shouldn't be picking. And the reason is the whole rationale behind the fight that the United States is picking with China today is on a wrong assumption. And then it's also a war that both sides cannot win. It reminds me of Iran and Iraq in 19...
Susan, you worked in the State Department for so many years. You are such an experienced and seasoned diplomat on Sino-US relations. So now Biden administration is already in power for over 6 months now, and now we had the Sino-US senior diplomat meet at Alaska, which is surprised a lot of people. Recently, just about a week ago, we had U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman visited China in Tianjin, closest Beijing. We had Mr. Kim in parts of it'll be the further of Beijing, but the U.S. actually got the closest city to the Beijing to meet Minister Wang Yi and Vice Minister Xi. So how do you interpret for the last 6 months, the new Biden administration compared with the Trump administration on the relation on China?
When things started to get really bad, that's when I left. So I can't be held responsible for the last couple of years of the Trump administration. I think Ronnie's very pessimistic, mentioning that the U.S. has chosen to fall into the Thucydides trap. I hope it's not that. I don't think it's that much of a plan, and I don't think it's that purposeful. I think there's still a lot of uncertainty and chaos in the Biden administration as they sort of inherit a lot of things from the Trump administration that are still being sorted out. Obviously, they're trying to focus a lot on domestic issues. Foreign policy is definitely second fiddle. I think the Biden administration is looking to not have problems on the foreign policy front, but it's fair to say that, first of all, moving from the Trump administration's very sort of toxic, negative narrative on China to something more constructive is not going to happen overnight, just because of the psychology of the body politic and the sort of the narratives in the media, et cetera. So looking at that problem, you could see how, it would take quite a bit of time and effort to try to strategize and figure out how to change that without giving people whiplash. The other thing I think is that Trump narrative on China is useful for galvanizing to some extent domestic political backing for certain parts of Biden's program. And it's also a defensive move. And I just published a chapter in a book. The book is called Engaging China, the last 50 years of Sino-US relations. And it involved writers and authors who were there at the beginning of US-China relations and are writing now and reflecting back on the engagement. But the chapter that I wrote with Ken Lieberthal at Brookings is about the transition between US political administrations and how US-China relations figures in that. And it's very typical in recent US administrations that presidents come in, especially if it's a change of party, and they have been very hard on China generally during the political campaign. And they have all kinds of wild ideas about things they're going to do, this and that, with respect to US-China relations. We saw this under Reagan, believe it or not. We also saw it with Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, maybe not quite so much with Obama. But it is a fairly typical thing to see this kind of adjustment take place within the first year of a US administration. And so Biden's been at this for 6 months. He's got a lot on his plate. He knows the US-China relationship very well. And I have to think, especially after seeing his meeting with Putin and the way that he has spoken determinedly about having a meeting with President Xi, he sees himself as a leader in this relationship and wants to drive it in a direction that's going to be better. It's going to take more time. The couple meetings that we've had so far are not enough. China is certainly venting anger at what's transpired over the last couple of years. And I just have to say, in fact, it's not quite fair because China did not vent anger during the Trump administration in the way that it's doing now with Biden. And it's actually the Trump administration that started all of this and did it in a very kind of chaotic way. But China was so worried about Trump's chaos, it didn't dare say anything. So it's had all of this anger sort of built up over the last several years. And now that Biden comes in, who's a more reasonable person and a more level-headed leader, they're sort of unloading on him because they know they can, because they know it's a more familiar and reliable relationship, maybe. You have to see that for what it is as well. I think it would be good if China could sort of just keep it low key for a little bit longer and give some more time. And then I hope there will be a meeting of the two leaders. We have to recognize too that COVID is playing a big part in this, in our poor communication, because it's very hard to meet. It was very hard to set up this meeting in Tianjin. It was very hard to set up the meeting in Anchorage. And it's very hard to get our two presidents together face to face in person in the same room right now. So I think we need to take a deep breath and maybe be a little bit more patient. I know China is not fully understanding all of the statements and things that the US is making. And I think that it's right for China to question that in private and maybe even in public, but to do it in a way that leaves open some space for us to sort of move this in a more low-key, gradual off-ramp direction.
Susan, I have a little bit slightly different take than what you have just said.
Good.
Your chapter with Ken talks about the different administrations, but from the Chinese perspective, it's the United States of America. Whether it's this president, that president, is the United States of America, and America has been so strong that everybody has to play along with the American politics, and hence new administration, you react differently. But then from the Chinese perspective, as I see it, is that they were really bending backwards during the Trump times. It's not just because Trump was a crazy guy in US-China relations and many other things. China was really bending backwards, trying to build relationships, restore the relationship, and then they failed, because Trump didn't want any part of it. And then they were hoping that Biden would be a little bit better, and Biden turned out to be no better. And as I said, some of us never believe that, Biden will turn better, because the whole body politics in America has already been poisoned.
Well, you mentioned the last 30 years, Ronnie. I mean, that exactly coincides with my time in the State Department, basically. I joined in 1991, the year that Soviet Union collapsed, and it went to the Soviet Union. But I agree with your fundamental observation that we really never had a come to Jesus moment after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But I think we never had that moment inside the United States either, to figure out sort of what it was now after the collapse of the Soviet Union that the US was going to be doing in the world. I mean, you say the attitude was about US supremacy, but I don't think that inside the United States, there was no debate, really. There was Frank Fukuyama's book about the end of history, and sort of everyone just kind of assumed that like everything would fall into place now and just go on. And they, were preoccupied with Europe, of course, and lots of other things, the Balkans. Then we moved into the Great War on Terror. And so it's just like never really sitting down and saying, okay, what is the purpose of our place in the world now? And really it coincided also with this rapid globalization. Really the 90s was the was the decade of globalization, and we probably hit peak globalization around 2008 before the financial crisis, but we never updated the institutions. We never actually sat around and fundamentally kind of thought about how globalization changes the international discourse and the way countries are going to operate together. We never really did that. And now we're kind of grown up with this international system. You know, China says UN Charter, but the UN Charter is not enough to serve us in a globalized world. It's not enough. We have to have rules and institutions around all these other things that are trans-border phenomena and transnational phenomena, and our systems don't fit together. So how are we going to do that? We've never really had that conversation, in my view. And so now China says, well, the US made all those rules, we don't want them. And the US says, well, China's trying to dump all the rules and impose its system on everyone. And so that's not a productive way of looking at the situation, actually.
I'm fully with you, Susan, on that one. I think, on the side of, that you and I have probably in the camp of, and that is, wanting the world to be a more peaceful one and US-China relationship develop in a better way. We really did not come up with a, whatever moment you call it, we did not really have an intellectual discussion that is nationwide in the United States along that line. And then at the same time, you have people such as Donald Rumsfeld, such as Paul Wolfowitz, such as the vice president under
Cheney,
anyway,
yeah.
Cheney, they begin to, the neocons begin to, move briskly during that time. And I think that the globalization of the world after the fall of the Soviet Union blunted their advance somewhat. But then eventually they took the center stage. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I would never imagine Biden taking the position that it does today vis-a-vis China. And so that tells you how that the whole political apparatus in America and then with the media really influencing the society has moved it in the wrong direction. And it's an aircraft carrier. Aircraft carrier cannot turn easily. And that's what I'm afraid that we're looking at.